Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Friday, April 30th, 2021. And here are our top stories. New guidance to mitigate cybersecurity risks in retirement plans. And what does the guidance mean for investment advisors and fiduciaries? Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Michael Hadley of Davis and Harmon, and Doug Peterson. He's Chief Information and Security Officer with Empower Retirement. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. Great to talk with experts. Let's get a reaction first. Doug, I want to come to you. What was your reaction to this Department of Labor guidance around cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, the guidance that was provided by the DOL, really reinforces that the shared responsibility of record keeping between the plan sponsors, the record keepers, the plan participants. So the guidance was very welcome for us as an industry. And, their tips for participants has been also very helpful. That shared responsibility, right? How do we protect those savings accounts? And particularly the inclusion of the links for both the FBI and CISA's cyber incident websites are really good resources for those who become victims of fraud, because it's frequent that they don't know who to turn to report. So I think there's a lot of good content in the 3 different reports that they provide.
Yeah, and Doug, you're a member of the Cybersecurity Standards Board at Spark. We're going to talk to Tim Rouse and Ben Taylor in the next segment. But how involved was Spark in terms of this guidance, in terms of those standards? Did you see any of what Spark has written over the past several years embedded in some of this guidance?
Yeah, I think they certainly took into consideration what Spark has been doing for the last few years. We've been fortunate to have a number of conversations with the GOL or the GAO and the DOL, as part of Spark, and really providing that information on what the industry is doing to manage cybersecurity. And as you know, Jeff, that Spark's Data Security Oversight Board's purpose is just that, to help us protect the record-keeping industry by bringing together those competitors to address those broad industry issues. And again, we were fortunate to have the ability to have conversations with both the GAO and the DOL.
Yeah. Michael, I want to bring you in here because obviously you serve an instrumental role with Spark in terms of many of the legislative agenda that the organization comes up with. But I want to get your reaction to what this means for sponsors. We're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to talk to Ben Taylor, Tim Rouse in the second segment of what this means for advisors. But what's the takeaway here for employers that sponsor retirement plans, 401k, 403b, 457, or even pension plans?
Sure. Well, and thanks for having me. Great to be here. And I have to thank Doug and the work at Spark's Data Security Oversight Board. Makes it easy for an advocate like us to work with DOL. As Doug said, the Department of Labor provided guidance to plan sponsors who were typically the fiduciaries. And one of their responsibilities is to monitor service providers. That's just what you're supposed to do. And essentially what the Department of Labor is saying is, look, as part of those responsibilities, here's some tips to monitor the cybersecurity practices of your key service providers. And so they sort of lay out a few things that plan sponsors should ask. It's not incumbent on an employer that makes widgets or a law firm like mine to be experts in cybersecurity. I mean, we all have to be data conscious, but we don't really have to understand the details. But it is important to ask questions just as you would about things like processing transactions, dealing with investments, those things where you're not an expert, but you expect your service provider to be an expert. DOL lays out a good question to ask. Things like, do you use a recognized standard? How do you validate your practices? What's your track record? Do you have any insurance? What happens if we have a problem? And then it lays out a few suggestions for contractual provisions that are in some contracts already, but are worth looking at. Things like, do you have a third-party audit? How do you use data? How is confidentiality of data protected? Will you notify me of a breach? And do you agree to comply with all state laws? I mean, pretty practical guidance, which any service provider that knows what they're doing will be able to answer and agree to.
Yeah. Doug, I want to come back to you because we saw, I think earlier this month, or maybe it was in the month of March, I'm not sure, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, come in and issue a report on cybersecurity. How do these regulations that we're talking about, these DOL regs, tie into that report and also some other federal regulations and guidance that we've seen over the years? Excuse me.
Yeah, so the department's tips for hiring service providers, I think, aligns nicely with the standards that Spark and the Data Security Oversight Board have developed. We published those a couple of years back now. But both of those talk about two key principles to better assist a plan sponsor in fulfilling its fiduciary duty. One is that the consumer needs to be provided standard cybersecurity information. Right, as Mike said, we don't want everyone to have to be an expert in security in order to evaluate the record keeping. And that's precisely what the goal of the Spark standards are for. And some of the questions that the DOL has recommended. And when you look at that, basic cybersecurity information also needs to be provided by a trusted, independent third-party auditor. Right? It's one thing for the record keeper to say that they're doing a good job. It's something different to have a standardized audit process for that. So when you look at what the GAO was recommending and what the DOL has provided, it's some of those questions that you can ask and get hopefully consistent answers from one record keeper to the next on how they're handling that cybersecurity and give you enough insight to make an informed decision.
Yeah. And Doug, I think by all accounts, and I'll get Mike's opinion on this in a second, but a lot of good information here. This is clearly an important topic, hence the Spark Cybersecurity Board, the work that you've been doing over the last 5 and 6 years to protect Americans' retirement security and help really protect data. Are there any things in the guidance that maybe give you pause or give you concern?
No, there's a few things that I think require a little bit more clarity. One of those is around breach notifications, right? Certainly that should be built into every contract. But there's not always a clear definition of what's a breach versus what's fraud. And most security incidents never reach the level of becoming a breach, right? So from a security practitioner's perspective, we get lots of attempts to get access, et cetera. But a security breach is really when you have a confirmed compromise of a system, and that includes the unauthorized acquisition, disclosure, modification, of personal data. And then there's an added potential risk of identity theft or fraud against the person. You compare that against cyber fraud, which is a confirmed compromise of a participant's account, right? Where either they're losing identity data or they're losing the dollars out of those. And so I think it's important to understand what that distinction is and what you're asking for in a contract around a cybersecurity breach notification. You don't want to know the hundreds of thousands of times that a website is attempted to be accessed. That's not a breach. So I think a little bit more clarity there is warranted. And Spark, back in April of 2019, actually published definitions for security breach and cyber fraud, which, when used with the DOL's guidance, I think provide a good picture for that. A second area is the suggestion around cybersecurity insurance. Right, that's a very new industry. It can be difficult to understand what coverage is, and what is being covered, what isn't being covered, what are the amounts, et cetera. So just a little bit of caution around that. That having to be able to check the box to say that you've got cybersecurity insurance doesn't necessarily mean you're getting protection from what you might want. From a coverage perspective. And
Michael, you heard what Doug said. And I want to ask you about what kind of gives you pause, but also, look, creating legislation tends to be an iterative process. From what I've read, I want to get your opinion on this. This is an important topic, right? Cybersecurity, this is not going away. Would you expect more regulation, cleaning things up, more more legislation in 2021 and beyond?
I do. I think at this point, though, I think it's going to be hard to get federal legislation. At the moment, we have essentially dueling proposals from Republicans and Democrats. Republicans have a bill called the Safe Data Act, which focuses more on notification, a victims fund for cyber issues, as well as preemption of state law. And that's a big issue. As states begin to develop their own rules, you're going to have a patchwork, which can make it difficult For a 401k plan, for example, that's a nationwide service, which tends to be preempted. But for Republicans, their view is let's have a federal solution, and that applies everywhere. Democrats also have a proposal, one of which is called the Data Act, and its really key point is providing individuals with a right to access their data and to have control over how their data is used. Similar to those of you that have been following this, what happened in California, very similar rule. But in Congress, we don't really have a natural place for jurisdiction. For retirement plans, there's 4 committees, 2 tax writing, 2 ERISA committees that sort of oversee our world. In cyber, it's not quite clear where it's housed, which means it's not clear who's in charge. I think the future for the next maybe 5 years is probably state laws. As more states develop sort of rules involving cyber breaches, identity theft, protection of privacy, we're going to have to deal with, I think, a patchwork for now. As far as the Department of Labor is concerned, they have said this may not be the end of it. They could look to do regulations at some point, but I think for right now, their focus is kind of getting these out there, seeing how the reaction is as they begin to bring enforcement actions, or at least ask questions from their regional offices, and then determine next steps.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to watch. And this is, as I said in this question, I mean, this is something that probably is only going to be more involved and more iterative. Gentlemen, we're going to leave it there. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have Tim Rouse and Ben Taylor on to discuss how this impacts advisors and fiduciaries of retirement plans. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back, and joining me now we have Ben Taylor. He's a Senior Vice President with Callan, and also Tim Rouse, who's Executive Director of Spark. Gentlemen, it is so great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks, Jeff. For having us again.
Ben, I want to start with you. Callan, a very well-known investment consulting firm. You serve as a fiduciary for most of your clients. What does this mean? What does this guidance mean for investment advisors, fiduciaries, those that are working with employers around their retirement plans?
Well, I think it provides a structure and a framework for how people can begin to conduct due diligence, which is something that Tim and I have worked with each other on for some years. We know that cybersecurity is a major area of responsibility for plan sponsors, but the fiduciary frame that has existed and still after this guidance to some degree exists is that it's one of protecting data privacy and it's one of trying to interdict theft. But beyond that, the exact boundaries of it haven't been put forward. And so you haven't had a structure for what would be considered at least a minimum necessary diligent effort. And this provides that framework with the tips. Now, it's not as strong as a more formal rule or other guidance, but just as they did with their tips for evaluating target date funds, this can kind of immediately form the kind of framework on which you build some basic due diligence efforts to ensure that you check the box of every single thing that is in the fundamental tips for the DOL for procurement for a service provider. It's worth noting, of course, there's 3 documents, right? So there's some things you can do to secure yourself. There's things you can do to have a secure software cycle for your organization. And then there's tips for procurement. And I think the most influential, ironically, will be the latter of those 3, which is what you can do for procuring a vendor, because it provides effectively a checklist of what you should be doing.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. And Tim, I want to come to you because, Ben alluded to this in his comments. I mean, you've been working together. Ben's a member of a Spark Cybersecurity Board, and you have a set of cybersecurity standards that you've created. What's the relationship here? Is this a good guideline for plan sponsors to consider looking at these standards?
Well, we really do see the Spark standards that we developed going back 5 years ago now really align well with the Department of Labor's guidelines. And the Department of Labor, in their recommendations, say that a plan fiduciary should use some industry-recognized standards. And we believe that the Spark standards are a really valuable tool here for plan sponsors to use. It has there's a couple of aspects of the plan of the Spark standards that align exactly with the Department of Labor. One, it's an industry standard, as Ben points out. We've been developing these. We developed these a number of years ago with his help and with the help of the other members of Spark. The other piece of it is that it's based upon an attestation from a third-party independent auditor, and that's critical because it really represents that trusted party that can provide the plan sponsor with a view behind the firewall, if you will.
Yeah, and Ben, I want to come back to you. I know you've been working with Tim and other members of the Cybersecurity Board to draft these standards, but do consulting firms now need to be experts in cybersecurity? Because you already have to be experts in record keeping, administration, investments, don't want to leave those out, and fees. Now, do you have to become experts in cybersecurity too?
I think there is going to be a continued need to become more expert in cybersecurity than the average consulting firm is. And I think it's an area that has been a persistent focus of growth in the capabilities of consulting firms that certainly we at Callan have endeavored to be at the bleeding edge of. With that said, the expertise that's required is a little different, right? So we need to be more conversant in the necessary due diligence and contract provisions that are associated with cybersecurity, as opposed to being cybersecurity experts. So for example, we don't need to go out and conduct penetration testing. I'm not reviewing anyone's code. That's not a core competency for a consulting firm, nor to be a reasonable one. But it is really important to understand how to consume a penetration test report. It is important to be able to understand that if you're looking at a cybersecurity framework, you're asking, do I want an attestation like an AUP from the Spark standards, or a SOC report, or am I comfortable with NIST or ISO for a standard? You need to be conversant at that level, but you don't need to think about how to construct a firewall or cloud architecture versus some other posture for your core computing.
Ben, there are probably thousands, we're not just talking about large plans here. There are thousands of smaller plans with maybe 10 participants, 50 participants, 100 participants. How can they best prepare for with these new guidelines to ensure that their plans are protected?
Frankly, what I would say they should do is they should structure their diligence process around the tips for procurement. And if they're looking for a ready-made set of materials for how to do that, I think one of the areas where you can look for that is actually the standards that we've worked on with Spark. Because one of the things that it looks like, if you look at the tips, I think it's not labeled with a 1A, but it's the first standard and this first sub-bullet is what Tim referenced earlier, which is look at an industry standard that's recognized. Well, it turns out there are multiple industry standards that are recognized, and part of the way the Spark standards were structured is the common features of all the industry standards that are well used amongst all the members of Spark. And so if you want something that's a universal can opener that opens every can for this process in terms of diligence and reporting, that's what that was developed to do. And so I would suggest that you start off with that process, leveraging what Spark has put together, but you also follow the tips in terms of what you're consuming. And I think that's going to be enough without everyone who's come up in the sort of CFA track or CFP track suddenly morphing over and saying, you know what, I'm going to tell you all about cloud architecture and whether or not you should use that. I would not wade into those waters. I would instead stick to the tried and true of appropriate due diligence methods using third-party attestations that are expert attestations.
And Tim, same question for you. When you were thinking up the cybersecurity board, clearly, and creating the standards, clearly it wasn't just for the large plans, it was for all plans. And those small plans may not be serviced by a consultant, right? They may not have a fiduciary like a Ben Taylor or a Callan to support them.
Well, that's correct, Jeff. And Ben and his organization, they have resources available to them to help evaluate record keepers. We've been in contact with, and other organizations have started to reach out to us since the DOL has produced this guidance, looking at utilizing the Spark standards with the expectation that they will then provide that sort of their recommendation based on these standards and provide that level of sophistication to the smaller plans at some sort of a subscription service. So you can imagine that now, as Ben points out, that not everyone needs to have that level of cybersecurity expertise, but they will depend on someone to provide that kind of expertise for them.
Yeah. Ben, does this change? We've all sat in these fiduciary meetings. You review the investments, you talk about the fees, the record keepers, administration. Does this change the tone and tenor of those meetings going forward?
Only a little bit. And I think the thing that may surprise some, depending on where you are in this industry, is that this, for many clients that we work with, is already a regular component of what they do. So I have a number of clients that have as a routine matter when they meet their investment managers or other service providers, include as a component of the necessary descriptions, not just their portfolio management strategy or organizational updates or key executives, but also their cybersecurity posture. Because they are very concerned that they conduct thorough due diligence throughout the process, not just that which is necessary to the core function, how you execute as a manager or record keeper or service provider otherwise, but are you secure? And the way that is traced out for how that's a component of those decisions is, do you touch data that is sensitive data? Or if you provide a service that cannot be interrupted without it being problematic, how strongly postured are you in order to be able to maintain uptime all the time in the instance that there's some kind of, say, ransomware or other cyber incident that would interrupt your service provider capabilities? And frankly, I think we've done really well with that as an industry because one thing did happen, the pandemic, and it wasn't a hack, but it was everything in the world suddenly going to their backup procedures in the second week of March of last year and then staying there for a year. And I think that broadly speaking, we've passed with flying colors as an industry. So I think we're going to keep that focus going forward because both cyber is more important, but also the pandemic and the associated responses put that front of mind for everyone.
Ben, one last question. So much of the last decade has been these lawsuits around fees, around the appropriateness of investments, administration, all these things wrapped up. Do you see this issue, cybersecurity, kind of creeping into those lawsuits, adding more complexity to those lawsuits?
Well, the reality, Jeff, is that the answer is that it already has, and it's going to continue. And so without going on in too much depth here, there's a lot of litigation that focuses on the various ways that you can think of data. And data can be something which is subject to fundamental civil rights legislation, what data can be used for what purpose. It can be viewed as an asset, which would then, if it's within a retirement plan, trigger certain fiduciary responsibilities associated with its treatment as an asset, something of value. So that can trigger a ERISA prohibited transaction considerations and fiduciary obligations. It's also an instrument. It's an aspect that is used for administration in which it might have a more neutral or ministerial view. Depending on which law you're trying to appeal to in terms of lawsuits, you can have a multiplicity of approaches that assail each of those different views, particularly that of an asset. So what we're seeing right now is not only some of those at the federal level that are being pursued with limited success thus far, I should note, but also there is an acknowledged need to further the treatment of some of these considerations at a federal level, driven in part by the fact that certain states are taking a pretty aggressive approach at leading in that regard. As each state starts to take a different approach, it makes administration of these plans harder and harder and harder. It calls for a federal solution. A federal solution that updates a 1974 law will probably have some treatment of data as an asset. When that happens, it opens the door to all manner of fiduciary considerations. So yes, I think you should absolutely expect the environment to evolve in such a fashion that eventually these lawsuits become more and more common. And they'll take a number of different approaches. They'll both be, did you secure the data appropriately, but also what is the value of the data? Are you treating it as an asset that you're being a fiduciary towards in its conservation and protection, or are you allowing people to do things like marketing with it or otherwise without compensation? So there's going to be a lot of new angles here, and I think it's just going to keep growing.
Yeah, well, one thing I think we'll be talking about this issue quite a lot over the next several years, not just the next year. Ben Taylor, Tim Rouse, an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thank you for joining us on the program this morning. And of course, we look forward to having you back again very soon.
It's lovely seeing you, Jeff. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jeff.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, and of course, our website. We're back again tomorrow for BRN Weekly. We'll have a very special guest and, of course, take a look at some of our best segments for the week. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.